Hello everyone and welcome to Liverpool Irish Festival and near this place Famine Lives and Afterlives in 2600. 2600 is a Who's History project led by the Institute of Irish Studies at the University of Liverpool and Sidelong Glance Productions, with whom the festival are really proud to partner today for this event. Just to give you a little overview of what's going to happen today, we are going to have an introduction from the film's makers. We will show the film and then there's a panel discussion to take place, and after that we'll have a Q&A. What we'd really like to invite you to do is, as questions crop up throughout the event, if they come to mind, do please pop those into the chat. You can find the chat by using the speech bubble icon, normally found somewhere in the middle and below, and you can just drop that as a question to everyone, or you can send that to me directly if you prefer, and then during the Q&A we can also come to people who wave and make themselves known to us. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass to Dr. Eleanor Liebeck of Sidelong Glance Productions and the Institute of Irish Studies to introduce her film. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to you all this evening, and a real honour to be a member of this panel. Special thanks, of course, to Emma for inviting us to hold this event. As she said, I'm Dr. Eleanor Liebeck, a lecturer in literature at the Institute of Irish Studies and also in the Department of English at the University of Liverpool. Alongside that academic side of my work, I also co-direct the production company Sidelong Glance with my colleague and sister, Dr. Rosie Lavin of Trinity College Dublin, who I believe is in the audience this evening. So hello, Rosie. 2600, the film that you're about to see, is one of 4 short pieces developed by Sidelong Glance over the summer of 2021 and released online by the University of Liverpool as a series Whose History this autumn. Our main focus this evening is 2600 as we explore the ethics, challenges and practicalities of commemorating the Great Hunger in Liverpool and beyond. The greater part of our time will be spent in conversation about the film and its contexts. But before I introduce the panel, I'd like to tell you a little more about the Whose History series and the making of 2600. We live in a moment when the commemoration of historical events and individuals necessarily provokes urgent debate. The question of whose history is a live one, as we as a society explore or confront, for better and worse, how to adequately recognise and respect histories that might seem distant or dislocated from our own present, or the realities of shared heritage. This was the immediate international context for the film series developed by Sidelong Glance, whose history represents, or better, represents, historical moments occurring on or nearby the University of Liverpool South Campus and surrounding areas over the past 200 years. Whose history was designed in significant part to signal to the university community, its staff and its students that the area had and still has its own meanings, different meanings, for the many thousands of people who have lived, worked and travelled through the place that we now as a university call home. The challenges of commemoration have long been familiar to anyone, anywhere involved in memorialising the catastrophic events of the Irish Famine. The Irish Famine Memorial Trail plaque, mounted on the west side of a university building bordering Mulberry Street to mark the 150th anniversary of Black 47, the most devastating year of the famine, was the original inspiration for the entire Whose History series. I'm just going to pause for a moment because my 4-year-old daughter is outside the door and keen to join the conversation. So I'll just make sure that Dad is looking after her. Excuse me for a second.
While Eleanor goes and deals with her little one, I thought I would just say We also have a really interesting event tomorrow that looks at Northern Irish history, the Susan Mackay event. Anybody who would like to register for that, there are still spaces available, and we would love to see you there. So I've just taken the opportunity, Eleanor, sorry, to advertise Susan Mackay's Northern Protestants on Shifting Ground tomorrow. I'll drop a link to that booking in the chat in a moment, but back to you, Eleanor.
Thank you so much, and I suppose it's one of the perils or the joys of working from home is that family make their appearance in wonderful and unexpected ways. So thank you for your patience. So as I was just saying, an essential part of the entire project was to create scripts and films out of primary source material. As filmmakers, we never wanted to risk ventriloquizing our subjects, but instead wanted them to speak directly to audiences through their own words. So as we began to research this production, we looked at court reports and newspaper reports concerning Irish famine migrants who had travelled to Liverpool, reports of poverty and destitution that were beyond harrowing. I've used the words catastrophic, devastating, and harrowing in an attempt to indicate all that was lost in those terrible years between 1845 and 1852. But even such extremes of language are deficient. We quickly knew that the film focused on this site, where 2,600 Irish famine migrants had been buried in unmarked pauper graves, would have to be nearly silent. To say that words failed us would be a great understatement. Instead, what you will see in the film is 26 people with current connections to the University of Liverpool, many, but not all of them Irish or of Irish descent, come together to create a living memorial at the gravesite on Mulberry Street. The site is now occupied by a block of student housing. Across 2 hours on a warm and windy day in July, each individual, family, or social group step forward to mark the pavement with 100 lines in chalk before tying a swatch of Irish-made fabric, linen, tweeds, or red flannel to a railing. Throughout the event, local musicians perform pieces specially selected to be in keeping with the tone of the event and also the historical moment we were remembering. Once these acts were completed, we all departed in silence. This rather lengthy introduction is intended to set the scene for the conversation that follows. But now let me introduce our panelists. Niamh Kelly lectures in contemporary visual culture and the history of art at the Dublin School of Creative Arts, Technological University Dublin. She's published on contemporary art, art histories and commemorative visual culture, and is author of Imaging the Great Irish Famine, Representing Dispossession in Visual Culture, which was published by Bloomsbury in 2018, and Ultimate Witnesses, the Visual Culture of Death, Burial and Mourning in Famine Ireland, which was published by Cork in 2017. She's currently writing a book on contemporary art for the series Art Since the 80s for Reaction Books. Greg Query will be known to many of you, I have no doubt. Greg, a native of County Down, has lived in Liverpool since 1972. He's author of In Hardship and Hope, a history of the Liverpool Irish. And Greg is chairperson of the Liverpool Great Hunger Commemoration Committee, which funded the Liverpool Famine Memorial and plaques 23 years ago. His book of poetry, A Stray Dog Following, is available from Stairwell Books and News from Nowhere on Bold Street. And Greg will be reading his poem, hopefully, his poem Vanished, later this evening. And John Chandler, again, will be known to many of you. John is the founder and chair of the Liverpool Irish Festival. Now retired, he worked as a senior manager of Children and Family Social Services. He's a well-known guitarist in Irish traditional music circles, playing in sessions and bands here in Liverpool and in Ireland. And the idea of having an Irish festival came to him on a return journey from the Ennis Festival, where John had been a guest player in 2002. And he's been part of the city's Irish music scene since arriving here in the 1960s. Before I hand over to Emma to play the film, one final. Throughout the planet, British extraordinary work others in Liverpool have done before us in terms of commemoration, cultural and community work. We can only hope that we've been as respectful of that legacy as we have been inspired by it. And we were so sorry to hear from Greg that Tony Birtle passed away last week in Fazakerley Hospice. He was loved and highly respected throughout the Liverpool Irish community. So I'll now pass over to Emma, who is going to play the film, and I'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Can we just make sure people are muted, please?
Garid den áit seo sa bhliain 1847, aimsir an drochíl. Cuireadh thart ar 2,600 deoraí bocht ó éireann in Uigine uair Isle. Gan chomhartha os a gcionn. Cailleach go daileamh daróiliad I baróiste learfáil, sin íon chríoch a bhíortha, tar éis dóibh tethe lena nanam an gcuirt a bhór, 1845 go dtí 1852.
Near this place in 1847, some 2,600 destitute Irish famine migrants were buried in unmarked pauper graves. They had died in extreme poverty in the parish of Liverpool, so ending their flight from the Great Hunger.
So just before we begin our discussion of the film, I understand from Emma that there was a little bit of feedback when I was giving my introduction. So I'm just doing a little bit of a sound check. How is it sounding now, Emma? Great, fantastic. Okay. So Nivan, perhaps I can come to you first. I'll speak to each of our panelists in turn, and hopefully we'll generate a conversation between ourselves before we open it up for a Q&A. But watching the film back and kind of thinking about the ways in which I've introduced it, I kind of put an accent on the idea of wordlessness, if not silence, and the significant part that played both in the sort of the development process and then also on the day itself. And that seemed to be the only way to us of approaching something of the scale of what we were commemorating. So kind of through your research, I mean, is that sense of being beyond words something that you see commonly in famine memorials and memorialisation, Nivan?
Well, first of all, if I feedback, thank you. Is there a problem with my sound there? Sorry.
It got better then.
Okay, it's okay now. I think okay. Firstly, thank you, Eleanor, very much for the invite to respond to this work, this film, and all the historical and commemorative work that has preceded it. And congratulations to all the festival organisers on a fascinating programme. I think, yeah, the issue of silence is one, you know, I suppose that arises a lot. There has been some really interesting thinking around it in relation to memorial sites and trying to commemorate very difficult history. But there's also been problematic poetics of silence that can lead to a lack of representation. So it's a very delicate and tense balance, I think, to achieve. I mean, one of the fundamental problems of heritage is that we obviously cannot fully comprehend the experiences of the past, or perhaps even of each other in the present. But I think that's why heritage matters, to try and address and bear witness to what we have not directly known in the best ways we can. And I think there's been a lot of debate across a number of different aspects of difficult histories around, I suppose, calls for silence. I was listening to Professor Jay Winter recently speaking around memorials of World War I and museum representations and the rush for sound, to literally put words into the mouths of people from past through different kinds of representational strategies. And you used an interesting term there about not wanting to ventriloquize. And I think the potential of silence in participation is perhaps the most effective mode of trying to engage imaginatively with empathetic bearing witness to the past. So in other words, it's not that the past doesn't speak to us through some of these sites, but that it, in our respectful engagement and embracing silence as a medium, that in fact we can perhaps move towards some kind of empathetic comprehension. And I guess some of these debates are most explicit at the moment around questions of reenactments of various difficult histories, and where the desire for sound or simulation has moved towards an entertainment rather than a commemorative or respectful memorial form. I was really struck with this particular film and its reference to the event, that I think the silence allowed for a connection in participation that was respectful, and that facilitated children as well, and cross-generational participation in a way that's really hard to achieve. So I think that those connections between indexical site, material culture and presence seem to have worked really well in this event, and are presented in the film in a very meaningful way of respecting and acknowledging the gaps in understanding, but not as a cue to not represent. If it's a rather long answer, but I think it's been definitely a huge difficulty for famine representations in particular, and any history that's a history of dispossession, or other histories that are about lack of material wealth. They create conundrums for representation later if there's a lack of voice to start with.
I mean, in a sense, and forgive me, I think the feedback might be coming from when I turn my microphone on and others are on. So forgive me if that's the case. But I mean that in a sense answered my next question for you, which was about your work on the ethics of spectatorship in relation to memorials, and whether or not it's possible to create sites of memory or memorial events respectfully without sort of turning the subjects that they commemorate or memorialize into spectacles themselves. I mean, there's something that we were very sort of aware of, cautiously aware of, that might come up when we speak to John in a moment about kind of sort of playing on that place, on that site. You know, the idea that actually this location where a block of student housing now stands was a resting place, was the final place of so many people. And how do we manage that kind of in the everyday, and how do we engage with that and be respectful of that space, even though its usage has changed over time?
I think the use of, you know, the heritage trail and the plaque itself are really important in these kinds of markers that mark a site on an ongoing basis. I think these are often, they are literally overlooked. We tend not to see them when we live in a place. But heritage trails or events like these really, you know, stop and draw attention to the places we're moving through. And I think, you know, in Ireland, Skibbereen town, for example, has made a great use also, like Liverpool, of the heritage trail, that people can be brought through a space and move at their own pace, do part of it, take a break. But there's that sense of the specificity of this local history that's connected to a much wider, you know, transnational history. That I think the medium of the heritage trail is hugely valuable, and that way of interconnecting with each other's, with the past, with the lived life of a place. So is very can be very meaningful and very useful to keep the past in the present. So there's a moment on the Skibbereen Trail, just outside the town on a hill. It's a beautiful breezy spot. It's always breezy. You look down on the town, but there's a large stone roundel on the ground with 3 arrows, one to the workhouse, one to the graveyard, and one to the sea. And I kind of, when I was looking at this particular film and people kneeling on the ground, chalking out the ground, I was kind of reminded of that connection between decisions made in places, experiencing happening at particular geographies for different complex socio-political reasons, and the pressures of that, and the kind of connections between land masses through these kinds of histories. And there are samples in contemporary art as well. Francis Elise has done a number of works where children are also involved, but migration is evoked. There's a wonderful work Don't Cross the Bridge Before You Reach the River, and he has filmed 2 sets of children in Spain and Morocco walking into the sea with boats. But these kind of connections occur in famine memorial sites, and that kind of double layer of a heritage trail, whereas a participant, you're moving through space and you're recalling in your own time and at your own pace what has happened here and how that might connect to these other places. So those kind of, I suppose, elements of the work, the 2600s kind of converge, I think, around these connected concerns of the everyday and the past and being in place. But the humble plaque is, I think, a really important marker of sites that can be reinterpreted, reinvigorated in different ways.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as filmmakers, we were very conscious of wanting, in a sense, participants to kind of embody and enact, to feel themselves kind of physically present in this memorial, to feel kind of that connection with what they were doing and with what we had come together to remember. And I mean, this is essentially, you know, this is a great way of, I suppose, moving on to Greg and talking to Greg a little bit more about that idea of the local specificity of how the famine has been memorialised in Liverpool. So if I can turn to you now, Greg, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the Famine Trail kind of came to be, and plans for its regeneration, because I know that that's something that you know, within this immediate setting and context of the Liverpool Irish Festival is really important. These plans for renewing attention to the trail. It'd be great to hear a little bit about it.
Yes, Ellie. Well, thanks. The original committee was really something which generated almost spontaneously in Liverpool some years before the 150th anniversary of the Great Hunger. There was a strong feeling that Liverpool had to do something to mark what had happened and the impact it had upon the city. And our committee was an open committee. It started out as representatives from the different Irish organisations in the city, but other people joined it. They were all local people. It was a wide spectrum of people. And they were the ones who carried the work forward. Initially, most of the funding came from small donations from people in the city, which I think is a testimony to the importance that these events held in the minds of people in the city. We later on got donations from the British and Irish governments and many of the civic bodies around Merseyside, and indeed from Dunleary and Dublin city councils. But it was essentially local people who carried forward that work. The actual plaques were located by Ian McKean, who was a lecturer at the Institute of Irish Studies at the time, and he did most of the historical research related to the plaques. And for people who are interested in the work of the committee, want to know more about it, we lodged all our documents in the Central Library in Liverpool, which any member of the public can go in and request to have a look at. And there you'll find all our correspondence and newsletters and details of all the various things that we organised. Many of the people involved in those days sadly have passed away now. So those of us who have survived, we're really delighted that there's been an upsurge of interest in the commemoration of Great Hunger and how it impacted on Liverpool. Ellie's film is a very good example of that. And there were three of us who were there at that event. Ellie had actually been at the original unveiling of the plaque some 23 years ago, and it was a very moving moment for us. But the Irish Festival have got a Heritage Lottery grant now to do some fresh work on the plaque. They have appointed John McGuire, who's is going to lead the project. It's got Heritage Lottery funding. They have, I think, 10 researchers involved in the project. They will be researching the background to each of the plaques and turning up fresh material. They will generate a stronger social media and internet presence for the Heritage Trail. And they will make links both back to Ireland and to other parts of the Irish diaspora. So I'm really looking forward to see what they come up with. I think it is very important work, and I really like the film. One aspect of it was making chalk marks on the pavement, chalk marks which are going to shortly disappear and be washed away and leave no trace behind.
Thank you so much, Greg. I mean, it's as I said by way of introduction, we were very, very conscious of the extraordinary work that had kind of gone before, and us kind of coming along and in a sense picking up a baton in making this film. It's such an exciting phase now that the Famine Trail is moving into with this funding and with this kind of large group of people kind of dedicated to reviving it. I suppose one of the things that we thought about in making the film, thinking about the plaque's presence on the university site, the university being an international space, people from different generations, many different kind of social backgrounds, kind of attending classes, working there in different ways, in sort of different occupations. So we wanted to try to make this site kind of meaningful for the entire community, as diverse as the university is today. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about how we might make sites of memory meaningful for people without direct connection to the event or individual or group that's being commemorated. Kind of how might sites with a particular resonance for a specific group also engage and inform the wider community?
I think it's a challenge because, as Niamh said earlier, you can put a plaque there and people will walk past it every day. In our work, we did try to not exclude any other groups. We didn't make it specific to any particular group or did anything that might leave people in Liverpool, which is a city composed of people from many different cultures. So that we wanted an environment in which anybody could feel that they could come along and take part. But I think you've got to look to wider cultural activities to try and engage people. I think what you did in that film was very effective, a very simple and appropriate activity which anybody could take part in. But I think a lot of the work of bringing to life what has happened in the past has been done by novelists and dramatists and musicians, and we need to look in those directions. I don't mean as entertainment, but those platforms can be used to a history book is an important part of informing people and giving people evidence of what took place in the past. But I think it's cultural activities, what I'm calling cultural activities, can really bring things to life and draw them to people's attention. But I think it is very, very important to remember the hardships our fellow human beings endured, especially if those hardships took place close to where we actually live, and particularly where people have been in hardship and difficult circumstances. The powerful and wealthy often don't want us to recall that these things happened and to learn from them, which makes it all the more important that we do. Does that answer your question? Or?
Most definitely, Greg. Most definitely, yes. And I think it's a brilliant introduction actually to Vanished, your poem. I mean, your poetry was equally as an equally important inspiration to us. Along with your own historical research and the historical research of others, such an inspiration to us as we were kind of planning the film. And if you're happy to read Vanished for us this evening, I think it would be wonderful to hear the poem.
Okay, Ellie, thanks for asking me to do that. The Mulberry Street graveyard was closely linked to the workhouse, and those 2,600 were just from 1 year. And the effects of the Great Hunger continued to hit Liverpool for years afterwards. And it was just from one graveyard. And there were other graveyards around Liverpool, church graveyards and the pauper graveyards, which were filled in those years and didn't have the capacity. So this poem is set in the Vauxhall in the north of Liverpool, near a place called Sylvester Street, where there's a children's playground. It has not been built on because it was formerly a graveyard. And there were so many Irish people buried there in the 1840s. It is, in effect, an Irish famine graveyard in the heart of Liverpool. The remains have since been removed, but the poem imagines that some of them might still be there. Weathered sandstone pillars mark the threshold. Exhausted ground of tarmac, stone and railing. Sweet soil that once gave birth to daffodils and snowdrops, now trampled underfoot and barren. You hold on our behalf the burdens of the past, last relics of the vanished people whose voice was ever drowned. Is there prospect of redemption here? Should I stretch out upon the ground to weep my tears into the soil, to claw the senseless earth, conjure it to life, and claim it back? More bone than flesh, you came to rest here in the heart of Vauxhall. The tarmac and the stunted grass cannot remember that you once had dreams of the wild Atlantic crossing. You whose bones now tremble by the waterfront to the rhythm of the lorry's rumble. Here, dignity in death was the kindness of strangers, the grandeur of the church not granted. The sky became your vaulted canopy, the salty mist your unction, the merciful dark your coffin. Who was it passed you down in threadbare winding sheet by single candle light, their solemn prayers whispered to the wind? Do lingering bones still cower here, like the jagged ribs of some old shipwreck? Are there skulls, each an empty tabernacle that once cradled memories and dreams? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Such an extraordinarily moving poem and evocative of the place in its present and also its past. I think, moving from poetry to music now, maybe I can turn to John, and perhaps we could begin by talking more generally, I suppose, about the Irish traditional music scene in Liverpool and why, John, you think music remains such an important part of Irish heritage and identity in the city.
Thanks, Ellie. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to see so many people here. I came to Liverpool in the mid-60s, and one of the attractions of being invited to play in this particular project was that my introduction to Irish music in the city was in the Sunday night sessions, as there were then, in the Cambridge pub, which was right alongside the site where we played and was filmed for this particular video. So that was of considerable significance for me. And at that time, playing traditional Irish music was a somewhat risky enterprise. You had to keep your eye on the door to be wary of any people who might take exception to what used to be called rebel songs that were likely to be sung in that era. But I've been involved in traditional music ever since. I founded a folk club at the university with Jude Kelly, who went on to much greater things, and director of the South Bank and the Wow Festival. But she was or is of Liverpool Irish descent, and was an additional introduction to that panoply of music and the arts in wider terms, which I found so attractive, and which ultimately led to the founding of the festival, which was significantly driven by my music experiences. And I'm pleased to say that traditional music sessions in the city and concerts seem to be becoming even more likely to be found than used to be the case when I first started playing. I think at the time that the festival was founded, that was shortly after the demise of the old Irish Centre. I'm happy to say that the new Irish Centre in Boundary Lane is thriving. But it was one of the concerns that I had about the marginalisation of Irish people in the city and Irish culture, that I wanted to try to assist and make sure that the significance of that wasn't lost, and hence the creation of the festival, and it's difficult to continue to find new ways of producing and introducing traditional Irish music. A lot of it relies just on people's coming together in pubs and in kitchens and playing it in those settings. But as I say, it seems to be almost resurgent in the city. There's a session tonight in a Shenanigans pub. There's another one on Thursday in the Old Bank. The Irish Centre itself is having its once a month traditional music session on a Friday. I was playing last night with Greg in the Edinburgh pub, which has a Monday night session. And years ago we used to routinely visit Peter Kavanaugh's wonderful quirky pub in Liverpool 8 and have a session there, and the landlady is ever delighted to see us when we make our annual pilgrimage back there during the festival, and that was on Friday night, our rollicking night. So I think the city's in great shape, and I have no enthusiasm, very little enthusiasm, to venture 30 miles up the M62 to Manchester to delight as I may, but I have a rather negative view about what musical wealth I might find there in comparison to our city. Partly due to I suppose the considerable influx of young people. I think there was a time when there was a concern it might just be a risk of being delivered by doddery old fellows and women, and it was very much a province of an ageing generation. I'm pleased to say that is no longer the case either. It seems that the cultus in the city, delivered through the Irish Centre itself, has assisted and supported that continuing development and playing of Irish music. We deliberately chose, or Jenny did, I think, to be fair to her, music from a range of places in Ireland, obviously with a slightly slower edge to them than we might normally thrill to be playing, but nonetheless there was a poignancy to much of the music that we chose to play during the day, the morning. And in Inisheer, incidentally, which is played at some length, particularly towards the end of the film, is almost a contemporary piece. I mean, that was written in the 1970s, but much of the music that we played was from a bygone era, by the likes of Turlough O'Carolan, who's revered, I dare say, as Ireland's foremost composer from the 17th and 18th century. We, of course, have got a vast treasure trove of music to pick from, and we were playing for only about half an hour. But there's loads going on in the city, and I'm pleased that the festival, which was founded to a considerable degree on music, it's, I think with some sorrow to say, it's less significant than it was, but then it's been counterbalanced by the wealth of arts and heritage and culture that we try to bring into our annual event.
Thank you so much, John. I mean, that was such a rich response, and in a sense kind of answered all of the questions I had for you at once. But I think drawing attention to that idea of, again, you know, different generations coming together in this kind of event. I mean, a special mention has to go to Megan for her beautiful playing, that was, again, so evocative of the mood that everybody was feeling, and kind of anticipated and created that mood, as well as reflecting how I think many of us were feeling in kind of witnessing and participating in this event. Beautiful playing from Megan. I mean, just finally, before we start to open up to the Q&A and you as panelists kind of have the chance to talk to each other. I mean, when you were playing across, you know, this period of time, I mean, what was that experience like? Were you conscious of other people moving around you? How did it feel kind of being on the site of the cemetery itself, as I kind of said earlier? Did that affect you as a musician, do you think?
I think it did. I think. I mean, I'm just a humble accompanist. I leave the carrying of the tune to Greg and in this case Megan. But there was also Mike and Jenny with us on the day. So I tend to be listening quite intently to the notes that are being trilled by those alongside me, and try to find a way of underpinning it all and just supporting the music. But it does, I think, mean I get quite locked into what is happening. But it was difficult to perhaps do that in the way that I normally would, because we were outside. It was a sunny day. There was a breeze, as you can hear on the soundtrack. As I say, we were looking across at a pub where I first learnt my chops in playing Irish music. I was very conscious of the circumstances that led to our being there. I'd known for several years that we were alongside the site of that mass grave. It used to be the Children's Hospital, and it was somewhat ironic that, that the hospital was built on top of it, or almost on top of it. It's now the Arts Centre, of course. But yeah, it all came together in a way which was quite moving, and I stopped playing at the end. As you may have realised, it was just Megan on her flute, and that was quite deliberate. I just got almost carried away, suggest I was going somewhere else, but I was actually there in the zone and really locked into that place, and the souls that I imagine may well have been around, and I hope they were.
Thank you so much, John. I mean, what a wonderful point to.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing it all together.
Oh, well, thank you all so much for taking part and for having this conversation with me this evening. At this point, we're going to open it up to a Q&A. It would be wonderful to receive questions in from our audience. If you have any questions, I think, as Emma suggested, put them in the chat, and the chat will be moderated. Emma, shall I hand over to you now?
Sure. So it was just to go back over some of the comments. Actually, people were incredibly moved by Greg's poem, and say thank you for that. There was somebody who said that they had their lunch at that site. So, you know, people have got all sorts of memories attached to those spaces. I'm really interested in this idea of the ethics of memorial, because obviously we're working on the trail and we're very mindful of the idea that any work that we do or any funding that goes to that could be looked at as the sort of commercialization of trauma, which is absolutely not at the root of what we're doing. And I wonder whether or not the panel have any views on that, and whether or not using public money for this, for instance, is the very best way to ensure that all of the intent here is correct and in place and proper for memorial.
Nivan, would you be happy to speak to that initially?
Sure. I think it's really interesting. It's very complex. I was thinking back to Greg's point, and I agree that cultural forms can really open up and expand representation and awareness. And of course, some of those will be commercial. So I was thinking one thing that hasn't come up here as a kind of sort of a side answer, if you like, is use of the Irish language, which I, in terms of the plaque and in your film. And I was very moved by the use of the Irish language in a cinema in Lance Daly's Black 47, when we were looking at a film that is entertainment, it's a Western genre. Here I was with hundreds of other people eating popcorn looking at this film. But it was profoundly moving. It was one of the most impacting popular representations of the famine that I had seen. It simply hadn't appeared to that audience. It hadn't to that expanded audience. And the use of the Irish language and switch to English subtitles in a point in the film. And it was quite impacting, certainly for me, and I've heard others agree. And I think that that's a very important point about cultural translation, transnational identity continuity, but in the context of a kind of transformed subjectivity. David Lloyd has written wonderfully around this, where directly out of the famine, you have migrant populations in different places. They are, it's a transformed subjectivity. It's subdued but not subjected. And I think that kind of, if that makes sense, so when I was looking at the film, I actually kind of felt that. So I think in a rather roundabout way of saying, not answering directly your question around funding, I think it's a wide church, but it's really about an attitude and a respect to the histories that are in play, that fundamentally the agenda is to try and draw out representations with integrity. And I think it's across multiple forms. The counter argument, I suppose, is across Ireland, so much memory work around the Irish famine has been driven by local interests, by local historians, by local history groups. So much of it is truly ground up. Lack of funding support, lack of any kind of networked, I suppose, support in different ways at a formal level, have not deterred fantastic memorial sites to come into being, but it's through such hard work and graft and interest in the past that, again, that comes back to the funding question, which I'll decline to answer directly.
Would anybody else like to answer anything that was in that question? I'm looking for hands.
I think that was a very comprehensive answer from Niamh, and I would agree with all that she said there. I think you need to keep in mind having respect for the people whose history you are endeavouring to explore. I think you need to be in a position of where you're presenting evidence to current generations and not trying to tell them what they should think or what conclusions they should come to. I think with those principles and basing what you're doing on good research, you won't go far wrong. Another feature of our commemoration was we didn't put anybody's name or have any personalities or anything like that involved in it. We didn't have any. We do have a list of people who contributed, but that has not been put on the back of the memorial or anything like that. It's very much focused on the people we were commemorating.
Thanks ever so much for that. So I'm now going to hand over to Rosie Lavin, who has got a question. There you go. You should be able to speak freely now.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you very much to the festival and thanks to the panelists. It's just really wonderful to be at this event and in your company. So huge thanks. I suppose I have a question about. Well, I'm just curious to hear the panel's views about the commemoration of the famine in relation to complicated questions about commemorating other events in Irish history. I'm thinking about the fact that we're coming to the end of the decade of centenaries, and there's also been discussion about how to commemorate the Troubles as we're kind of entering the sort of half century since then. And I just wonder, are the questions, maybe this isn't quite the right question, but how different are those questions, and maybe how different and how distinct is the commemoration of the famine, as opposed to these more, I suppose, to the more complicated recent and more overtly political questions of commemoration, and maybe how different is that in the UK as opposed to in Ireland, because I guess that's another dynamic that we've been exploring here. Thank you.
Greg, shall we come to you for this? And then Niamh.
Yes, I was hoping you wouldn't, but yes, I'm. So it's nice to meet at last, Rosie. It was only on Zoom. We did in Liverpool commemorate the people in Liverpool who took place in the 1916 rising, and we also had a commemoration at the Museum of Liverpool. We had a small exhibition there. But in Liverpool, we didn't do anything substantial since then. I'm not exactly sure why that didn't come about. But as you say, some of those events, there's much less consensus around how what the message is, if you like, behind those events. There's much contested territory there. Whereas the family events, there was certainly unanimity all the way along about what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. It's much more difficult in more recent events. It's certainly true that Liverpool people played a significant part in what was happening in Ireland up until the War of Independence. After the establishment of a parliament in Dublin, the Liverpool Irish community turned very much into Liverpool and their own situation here in the city, and became less involved in politics in Ireland. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I'm seeing Rosie nodding. Niamh, would you like to say anything on this?
Well, I wouldn't have much to add, except I suppose this is one of the key kind of defining aspects of processing those kinds of history is to do with the distance and time. And I think you know, as we think about a generation or 2 generations or 3 generations or the same generation, there's a very different response. And I think that's hugely impacting in trying to represent so close to difficult histories. I think that is, you know, one of the reasons, I suppose, why even the centenary of commemorations, though there is some distance, has created great challenges. Indeed, locally, you know, wars, the War of Independence and Civil War are very difficult to kind of tie down in terms of representational strategies also throughout this country. But I think the famine now there's a distance that perhaps lends itself to certain kinds of representation practices, where certainly troubles in Northern Ireland is much more difficult. And I mean, you know, museums in Northern Ireland have managed to do that in launching their exhibition last year, but with great difficulty. And I think the museums across Northern Ireland testify to the complexity of representation so close to conflict situations. I think that's borne out in Yugoslavia and Serbia and various places, Rwandan genocide museums and different kinds of post-conflict cultures. I think it's quite hard to process representation in time.
Eleanor, do you want to say anything else on this particular matter?
I just think that point that Niamh has made about the idea of events existing in living memory is so crucial here. And I suppose in a sense we were driven in. I mean, Rosie will be able to answer this question along with me, given that it's something that we worked on together. But we were guided towards a kind of silence and a necessary neutrality in some senses because of the famine kind of occurring in this distant moment, in the past, which is different from how we've responded and how directly engaged we are with social and political issues in other films in the series. I think particularly in Hey Joe, for instance, which looks at the history of post-war Liverpool 8 and specifically the commemoration of Black, Asian and minority ethnic veterans who fought and died in the Second World War. I think there is a much sort of a much more tense response to the political issues and the social issues that led to us making the film. I don't know, Rosie, perhaps you know you might say a little bit more about that, or perhaps that's enough to be said. I think distance in time is a huge factor in how we say what we say, and when and where we say it, I suppose, if that's not too woolly a response.
Rosie, do you want me to come back to you?
No, I think that's excellent. Many thanks to the panel, and thanks for answering what I know was a difficult question, but I suppose I'm so interested in these questions about commemoration, which we thought about a lot. And but yeah, the terrific answers. Many thanks.
Thank you ever so much for the question, Rosie. And for another question, I'd like to come over to Alex, please. Hi, Alex.
Everyone, can you hear me?
We can.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for the fascinating discussion so far and for the film. I guess the question for the whole panel is maybe a bit broader than the one I put in the chat, but obviously Liverpool's undergoing a lot of changes in the built environment, and of course in areas that were sites of migration to Liverpool, particularly around Vauxhall, which was mentioned earlier. Has there been has there been a conflict between the desire to look at and recover the history of the Irish diaspora in Liverpool and these new projects to redevelop various parts of the city? Because the city space is changing at such a rapid pace at the moment. Perhaps there might be some tension there between the potential for erasure and the need to recover this past. Thanks.
Ellie, I'm going to give that to you first.
Well, thanks so much, Alex, and thanks, Emma, for giving it to me. I don't know that I'm the best qualified member of the panel to respond to this question, first of all. I mean, what I will say, though, is that the Who's History series is hopefully going to be, something that the Institute and that I, as a member of the university, kind of revisit for a number of years. So I think exploring the experiences of different communities across Liverpool in different areas, kind of away from the university, is certainly something that I would be very keen to do in future years. And I know that different arts and creative groups, I'm thinking of John Maguire specifically, have engaged with different aspects of the heritage and the history of the Irish community in Liverpool creatively in different ways. So that kind of work of recovering the history of the community across the city is kind of going on at the moment. Whether or not that's being driven by this very rapid pace of change that Alex is so right to kind of bring our attention to, is perhaps something that Greg and John, with their considerable experience of kind of working creatively in the city in terms of memorialisation, a better place to kind of speak to. I will just say I didn't realise that Jenny Collins is here this evening. Jenny Collins is a videographer who recorded the event. So this is unrelated, although Jenny actually may be able to speak to this point as well about the changes in the city that in some sense have kind of motivated other aspects of the project, again particularly the Hey Joe film. But for a more specific response to Alex's question, I'll maybe go to Greg and John and Jenny. If she wants to say anything, it would be wonderful.
If Jenny wants to say anything, if she could wave, I'll come to you first, Greg.
Alex, I think you've hit on a very important issue. Indeed, and one that is of a great concern to me. To give you one example, a very important building in the history of social history of Liverpool was the North Corporation School in Bevington Bush, which is one of the, according to Wikipedia, it's been the only building in Britain to be delisted. Shortly after it was delisted, it was very quickly demolished, and nothing has been done to the site ever since. It has become what's known as a land bank, I think. So that's a kind of example of somewhere where the city council could have insisted that remnants of the old building were incorporated in the facade, but that was going to be put there. If I was to point to a particular building of concern, it's the Clanstock Gates, where all those Irish migrants came through from about 1832 until the 1930s. They all came through those gates, And I think it's very important for the city that those gates are kept. Those gates are a grade 1 listed building, but I think we need to keep an eye on what plans are being made. The City Council has been starved of resources, as we know, over the past 10 years with the current administration at Westminster. And so they're not in a position to a great deal of saving of buildings. A good example of that is the memorial at St. Luke's. The gardens now are often locked during the daytime because the gardens have been leased to a private company who are carrying on a business there. So that is also of concern because it concerns access to that memorial. So it is a major, all that is a major concern. Although I'm really happy to say that of all the plaques and the memorial we put up 23 years ago, none of them have been vandalized, and only one of them has been demolished. There was one at Holy Cross Church. It is now inside the local primary school and needs to be restored onto the street somewhere. But the plaques have not had any problems over the years, but there are real dangers of this the city's heritage, architectural and built environment heritage being compromised.
And Jenny, we'll just come to you briefly. Thanks for being with us.
Hello, hi. Firstly, can I just put it out there that I have a new puppy and my house is not Zoom worthy, so please ignore the background. No, I just wanted to thank Eleanor and Rosie and the team for kind of getting me involved in this project, because it's so rare these days that we get to, I don't want to say we have free reign, but I just kind of, when you click with people and you think, yes, this is something that is worth making, it's something worth doing well, even if it's a very simple one-day shoot that we had. And as I said, I think I put in the quote, I think it's going to stay with me for a long time, because often we talk about these things in the prep and we can have a lot of meetings, and until we get there on the day, we're not quite sure exactly what we're going to get through the lens. It's a completely different experience. But this one actually was pretty much from page to screen how I imagined it. And I think sort of going back to Liverpool changing in that environment, for me, I've lived here most of my life. I wasn't a student here, but I had a lot of activities and involvement in the university, and just seeing how that area of the city has developed and changed over the years. It is kind of, you do think there needs to be more awareness of what came before and why, you know, walking past a building that has a plaque on a wall, maybe there should be something that says, okay, well, why is that there? Let's have a discussion about that. So doing these things, it's great, you know, it's a wonderful change from corporate golf videos that I have to produce. It's great to be involved with things that matter. And I just hope it's the beginning, as Rosie said, of something that the university can take on and look at other different communities within the city.
Thanks ever so much, Jenny. John, have you got anything to add to the conversation about city changes and Alex's question about those sorts of developments?
Yes, I'll be brief because I was just typing an answer.
Sorry.
Thinking that my time might be limited. But I mean, I think the questions have been great, very significantly framed, and they do touch on, in my thinking, to the issues that the festival board has to contend with and address, and this milieu that we work in, and the rapidly changing environment that we have to almost preempt, predict, and respond to the changes, and then take decisions. In one way, that's quite a small issue for a relatively small organisation to contend with. But it did strike me that I should flag up that in order to increase our capacity to work in this arena, that we're going to be recruiting new board members, and particularly younger board members, I should add. So please, anyone here who has a hankering to come alongside us and to take part in what is a great enterprise, and we're well led in that by Emma, I have to say. But if you want to consider having a role in the organisation of the festival, I know I'm moving off the subject a bit, but please get in touch with me or come to the family day on Saturday at the museum. And some of the board are going to be down there, and we'll be happy to talk to anybody who thinks that they might have a role alongside us in pulling it all together.
Thanks, John. We're going to take a last question now from Arthur, who is primed and waving. Hi, Arthur. What's your question, please?
The question is about sort of. Oh, sorry.
We can hear you.
Oh, I can hear myself as well, but it kept coming up saying, "Unmute yourself." And I've done it. But yeah, the question really is about sort of the trying to tap into this amazing level of interest going on, and I wanted to contribute something like we just done an anniversary for the Catholic Cathedral, and we done a whole pile of sort of social local history, and we had these things set up between the two cathedrals down Hope Street, and you could go with your phone and just put them on, and you could listen to people speaking about their experience of using the cathedral when they saw the Pope coming and all this sort of stuff. And my background is I had 2.5 years as an outreach reporter for the Scotty Press. We had lots of interest about sort of the Irish community and going through things like sort of family history. And we mentioned the gates there and stuff, and trying to keep important things and things we may have lost and everything else. And I think we should also look towards sort of international links as well. I was trying to do a story in the Scotty Press about Mission Dolores in San Francisco, which had over 35 Irish graves, and all it had was the name of the person and the county and island they come from. And I wanted to do a story around this years ago, but everyone was saying to me, it's private, you can't do that, you've got to get some more information and stuff. And I've still got that list of names. And I was also a friend of Tony Bertels, and I'm sad that we've lost him. He'd often come back about his walking holidays and things he'd led in Donegal, and that was great. So I've really enjoyed the Irish Festival, and I would like to come on board and do some more stuff. I'm just suffering the moment from coming back from having double COVID, but I would like to have all these years of interest and contacts I've got and try and put them back into what we're doing, where we're going, how we're doing things. And I think it's fascinating. We're doing it just quickly. We're doing a trail in Bootle at the moment called the Blitz Trail. This is run by a local school. These are all children under the age of 15, and they're designing their own trail. So we're saying to them, here's all the information, here's all the stuff, you design the trail. So it's done by young people, it's for young people, and we're just giving the information. And it's the way forward. We need more young people. Sorry, I'm rambling. I apologize, but I've got links and stuff for you. Thank you. So the question was basically about how can we communicate more to young people?
Thanks, Arthur. Neve Ann, can I pass to you? How do we communicate with young people?
Well, I mean, that project sounds fantastic. And as Arthur was talking there, I mean, you've had a great project with the National Trust, I think quite recently, with children in colonial houses, a controversial project, I believe, with children visiting through the National Trust and getting to know the local history of, the big house. Are you familiar with that? I've just slipped my memory now, the name of the project. But it was a kind of, I suppose, rethinking imperial histories. And that sounds extremely interesting, that school children are much more actively involved. What you're talking about, Arthur, sounds fascinating, that to build and structure and I guess to mediate the research that they're given. And this other school projects with the National Trust went forward in that train where people would visit and actually go through the archives and have a look, and they found a different kind of history than what was necessarily being presented in the preserved rooms of these particular historic houses. So yeah, I mean, I think that sounds really interesting to just literally open it up. But I think this project that you've undertaken has involved children in a way with the past that is, hits the balance between not scaring them, but also engaging them in the respectful way.
We're very surprised by it because they've got 1,000 things to choose from, and we were trying to say, well, you've been influenced, someone's done this, someone said this, but the kids themselves said, we want to know. Our parents, our families talk about it and stuff, so we want to look where this trail is and what's going on. So that's what they want. We'll help, we'll go along with it, So we're trying to draw in some more funding, we're trying to get them more active in doing stuff. And if you ever come up to Bootle at all, Ash Street the moment, which is just by the main shopping strand area, we've just done a big rebuild up there. We've done lots of landscaping and lots of work going on, and that's going to be a central meeting point for where the trail runs from. But all these ideas can be put into the Famine Trail, and we're also doing one now of a sort of dockside trail as well, which goes from the north to the south and looking at the docks and the involvement and stuff as well. So all of this stuff is part and parcel of what we're doing, and we should be picking it up and running with it. Yeah.
Thanks, Arthur. So we've already said we're going to pick up after the festival because Arthur's come to a number of our events. We've got lots and lots of things that we need to chat about after the festival. So trust me, I will do that. Don't worry. Have any of our other panelists got anything they want to say in response to Arthur's question about involving young people? I'm just looking for waves. No? In which case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass back to Eleanor to thank our speakers. And then if you'll pass back to me, I've got a couple of festival messages to leave.
Yes, well, all that really remains for me to say is an enormous thank you to Nivan, to Greg and to John for their extraordinary generosity in talking to us this evening, talking to me in the run-up to this event. And also to Greg and to John for their involvement on the day. It feels inappropriate, but a quick plug for the rest of the series. Hey Joe, the first of the films, is available now on the university website. I believe Emma has details that she'll pop in the chat. And actually we'll be launching the third film in the series, E-Joy of Cooking, which focuses on the experiences of Chinese students currently studying in Liverpool, will be released tomorrow, all being well. So enormous thanks once again to Nivan, John and Greg, and to Emma for having us this evening, and to Jenny, an unexpected and delightful surprise that she's here with us as well. So thank you very much. Thank you all for listening and participating. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thanks to you, Ellie, for doing a great job in making the film. It was really terrific. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Can I just ask our panel, particularly Nivan Kelly, to let our audience know where they can see your work and find out more about what you're doing?
Okay, you mean post something, is it?
No, I just wondered if there was a handle they could follow you on, or an organisation website that they could find you at.
There's no handle, I'm afraid. There is TU Dublin. I'm searchable there on the TU Dublin Dublin School of Creative Arts staff. And my book is with Bloomsbury. I'm kind of searchable there. I think that links back, hopefully, to my work as well. Thank you.
And Greg, would you like to plug your book again?
My books, A Stray Dog Following, is available from Stairwell Books, and in Hardship and Hope is available from myself or from Waterstones bookshops in Liverpool, or News from Nowhere on Bow Street in Liverpool. I put my email address on the chat if people want to get that, or you can send me a message on Facebook.
Great, thanks ever so much. So I've just got a couple of notices really to say thank you ever so much for a fascinating debate and for helping us with our work and understanding around the famine. It's been really great to be working alongside the Institute of Irish Studies, and particularly with Ellie and Sidelong Glance Productions. We would like to say thank you to our festival sponsors more generally. We've got City Council, Arts Council, Irish Government funding, and of course the National Lottery Heritage Fund for the first stage of work that they're funding for our contribution to the revitalisation of the Liverpool Irish Famine Trail, which we're working closely with Greg on as a founder member of the Great Hunger Commemoration Committee. So all of those people and places are to be thanked. For more events as part of the Festival, where there are other history events, please do visit liverpoolirishfestival.com/events. We'll hope to see you at other of those events. And just before everybody signs off, I wonder if we can put cameras on and make an applause, please, for today's amazing speakers. Thank you very much for being with us. Thanks everyone, really appreciate it. So if speakers want to stay on, we'll just have a little wrap up, and so everybody else, thank you very much and goodbye for this evening.